Okay, for this week's reviews, we had a buddy cop movie and we had Michael Bay. So I think it was finally time to bring Bad Boys into the equation.
We've been talking about doing Bad Boys for a long time.
Yeah, we just want to get. This is another one of those ones where there was a whole bunch of stuff being juggled about which movie was going to be teamed up with which. So technically, we're kind of continuing this buddy cop thing next week
Yes.
as well. So
Next week was actually moved to next week. It wasn't going to be this week.
yeah, so you pretty much figured that one out now, haven't you?
Yeah.
Given that clue and the fact that it goes in line with us.
Yeah.
So obviously I went with these two because they're kind of this one was kind of the quintessential buddy cop movie of the 80s, and this one was the one of the 90s. And while they both kind of have different styles, they're both also these. They can be classified as action comedies, and we have the one cop who is the family man and the reserved one, and is just trying to not get himself killed, while also trying to keep his partner in line. His partner, who is an off-the-wall loose cannon that oozes cool and also a little bit of crazy, or in Briggs' case, a fuckload.
Yeah, big time.
And yeah, I think you get the gist of why they'd be teamed together. Though Richard Donner's approach to action and Michael Bay's approach to action are obviously much different, there's still definitely some comparisons to be made. It's also worth noting, we just talked about Michael Bay's latest movie, and we'll be going to I think Bad Boys was actually his first movie. Like, before he was doing, like, music videos or commercials or some shit. But Bad Boys was his first, like, feature-length thing. So, actually, though, I want to start with Lethal Weapon. Of course, Lethal Weapon begins, and it's this striking opening of this young girl who is half naked doing drugs and jumps off the balcony of her apartment or hotel, whichever it is, onto a car and dies. And of course, despite all of this bleakness, it's Christmas. And why is it Christmas? Because this movie's written by Shane Black. Of course. So, we learned that this girl was actually, while we do see her jump, technically she was murdered because of the drugs she was given. And Murtaugh, who is Danny Glover, owes her father, so he's going to look into this case. But he is given a new partner who is the insane, suicidal, crazy ass in every way, Riggs, who is Mel Gibson. How good that casting choice is up to you.
This was way before anything, though, too.
Yeah, so...
This was, like, hardcore foreshadowing.
It's like all the clues were here.
Yes. But we like Mel Gibson here on Pop.
We love Mel Gibson.
We really do.
Love Mel Gibson.
Yes.
It's a very interesting thing that they start us off with here because there's kind of an intercutting back and forth. Like, we see Murtaugh and he's got the beard, so clearly he's kind of a more, like, he's very serious about his job, but he's also very laid back in comparison to other people that will enter the story soon enough. And it's his birthday, and we see that he's a family man and everything's kind of calm, but then his age is creeping up on him, obviously. One of the most famous lines in movie history.
Yep.
It's said 3 times throughout this movie, and numerous throughout the entire series.
And throughout the entire history of the world now, too.
Yeah. His cameo in Maverick, of course.
Yes.
And all the tie-ins here as well. So we see him, and he's kind of coping with... His biggest problem, despite all the violence that surrounds his job, is the fact that he's getting old. That's his main issue with life. That longing look he gives himself in the mirror after his impromptu birthday party. And then we cut back and forth to Gibson, who is basically... His breakfast in the morning is a cigarette and beer. And then he goes off to do that coke bust. And we kind of get the idea of... For a while there... He kind of looks like, when we see his opening scene where he emerges naked from bed and just looks like he lives this absolute shitty existence. And then he goes to this coke deal where he's with these guys. If you don't know any better and you're going into the movie totally blind, he looks like a criminal in every sense. Until we learn that he's actually there to bust them. And throughout, pretty much with every progressing scene that Riggs is in his kind of introduction before he and Murtaugh meet, even then afterwards, but still, his craziness is kind of amped up, and we're really not quite expecting just how far that goes the more we see him. Because then, of course, there's the scene where we kind of get his backstory, where he has the picture of his wife who died in a car wreck, and the one bullet that he has for himself, that, like, I guess this is supposed to be like a nightly routine, where he has the idea to kill himself, but he never quite goes through with it, because he wants to do his job. And that's the only reason he doesn't. But just in case, he has, like, the hollow point bullet so that his head will explode, and there is no chance of his survival should he do it.
At least he has a plan.
Yeah. And then, of course, once they meet, immediately there's the whole... This is kind of where... I'm sure there are many examples prior to this. Actually, yeah, both the movies next week. But this is kind of where the buddy cop movie really seemed to kind of have a real birth. Where it was the two partners who come kind of from different backgrounds, but then also have more in common than you think they would, and then they eventually become best friends despite their clashes and their clashing personalities and all that. It pretty much all comes back to Lethal Weapon, though there are some previous examples before it. Once it even gets to the point to where once we actually... It all happens very quickly, too. And you would think that would be kind of a setback, like it's kind of the movie trying to rush itself. But the movie only takes place over like the span of 2 days. But it's actually quite convincing how they set it up to where they become friends so fast despite everything else about them clashing. There's the moment when Murtaugh finds out exactly how far Riggs' craziness goes in regards to... actually, it kind of starts with the jumper scene. When he goes up and the guy is going to jump and commit suicide. And Riggs tries talking him down at first, and when that doesn't work, Riggs' second plan is to handcuff himself to the guy and jump first, so the guy has to go with him. But then there's that great moment when he's telling Murtaugh his suicide plans, and that scene gets really, really grim really fast, and Murtaugh immediately understands just how deep the darkness inside Riggs goes. And it's very interesting to see, they just come from there, but after this scene is over, Murtaugh is drenched in sweat, just from his confrontation with Riggs. And then there is, but yeah, as I said, once that scene moves on, despite how really intense that scene is, it's pretty much the very next scene when they start to become friends already. Because Murtaugh seems pretty easy to get a grasp on, and Murtaugh now has a grasp on him and where he's coming from. So then they're just driving around now, and he's gotten food after his almost suicidal episode. And then we see this really light side of Riggs suddenly come out, where he like sincerely wishes Murtaugh a belated birthday. And it's actually a really nice moment, because you can just kind of tell that despite everything else, the rest of the way we've seen him throughout the movie, he actually kind of means it. And just, is trying to be buddy-buddy with him, more or less. And then, there's the scene where they work on Murtaugh's boat, and he has dinner with them, and it all happens very quickly, yet somehow very naturally. And that just really comes from their chemistry together. And there's, okay, I guess, what do we talk about now? Obviously, there's two things to this movie. There's the friendship aspect, and then there's the fact that, this is kind of a hardcore action movie as well. And they were able to kind of balance this out really well, because, like I was saying, when it comes to their relationship, a lot of it is actually a comedy, despite some of the dark sides that it comes from. And we're introduced to our villains, who are Gary Busey and Mitchell Ryan. Mitchell Ryan, you probably know from either Dharma and Greg or Liar Liar. He was Mr. Allen.
Which a nice Dharma and Greg connection for the other movie, too.
Yeah. Our Mitchell Ryan's character is kind of like the head honcho villain, but our very front and center villain is Gary Busey. Who is just this hardcore assassin. This character is out of his fucking mind, and definitely a good match for Riggs. Because a lot of people think about like his reality TV persona and stuff like that, and just kind of the way he is in general. People tend to forget Gary Busey's a really good actor.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
No matter how crazy he is, he's really good at his job. And he's absolutely perfect in this part. So then we have scenes like there's the bleakness of the opening by itself. And then there are these scenes where we get to know the villains that are really kind of, hardcore and violent scenes. And then there's the later scenes when Briggs and Murtaugh are being tortured separately. The electric shock scene gets to a lot of people. But despite all that seriousness and violence that is in this movie throughout, how much they blend in the comedy is actually effortless. And that takes a lot. There's the moment at the shooting range, for instance, when we have to have plot, but they also leave enough room for us to kind of really like the characters even more, because they're talking about how they suspect that prostitute that supposedly came across the body, and they just really quickly go through. Well, yeah, that's kind of a thin way to go about it, but hey, we'll go with that anyway because that's our best lead. That's what we have to go on. And it's like they're getting the plot out of the way, and then the rest of the shooting range scene is just them fucking around so we can fall in love with them more and their chemistry. When Riggs shoots the smiley face into the target, and so the way they balance that is really it's a very interesting. Donner definitely gets a lot of credit for this too. And he's such a diverse director too, because he's done the likes of the first Superman movie, and then Lady Hawk, and The Goonies, and Scrooged, and a movie like this. And it's really you would think action is his main thing when you watch this movie. You'd think the rest of his movies are just movies like this if you only knew him from this. So I've always found that kind of impressive from him. But a really good thing also that comes from focusing on the chemistry while also keeping the plot moving simultaneously, it is that really helps the pacing too. This movie moves really fast, because if it's not throwing these really spectacularly crafted action scenes at you, you just love watching them interact. And it just kind of keeps the whole thing moving, and it's always kind of progressing in one direction until we get to our big climax. And the great thing about that also is this is one of those movies where even though it's an action movie throughout, you never really, the way it goes back and forth, you never really know when an action scene's going to break out. They could just be doing their thing, and then suddenly the house explodes, or the guy that he owes gets shot through the window by Busey, who's in a helicopter that they have to chase. An action scene could just break out at any given moment throughout this entire movie. And another thing is, it's also one of those, generally when you think of action movies like this, generally the full genre is called the big dumb action movie, is what people like to call it. So that they can watch an action movie but feel smart at the same time. Because a lot of action movies tend to have to go towards the implausible and the ridiculous in order to make their scenes more spectacular. Most of this movie actually makes sense. And that's something you don't necessarily always see in an action movie, where everything that happens one right after the other is because of something before it, and it makes sense for the next thing to happen. That's actually kind of not very common in action movies. especially if you're trying to get really big scenes in there. And this movie doesn't even really go that big. That was for the later movies. But it's definitely action-packed and definitely secure in there. And, you know, they do kind of treat it... There's some things thrown in there like that. Like, the line, what did one shepherd say to the other? Let's get the flock out of here. There's stuff like that in here. So it's all good. But the main thing here is... there's also a couple of interesting musical connections in this. Murtaugh's wife is Darlene Love. And on top of Michael Kamen's score, the other composer in this movie for the score is Eric Clapton. So there's some interesting little things in there also. But really just the main thing is pretty much every buddy cop movie you see nowadays, really any buddy, it doesn't even necessarily have to be cops, just any buddy movie in general feels like it's striving to be Lethal Weapon. That's just like when we were talking about Ride Along 2. As soon as I saw Ken Jeong's character, it was like, well, he's clearly trying to be Pesci from the sequels. That's just a given. But yes, this is a movie that a lot of people really strive to be when they make movies like this. And rarely do they ever reach it. So, it definitely has its reputation. Now, on to something quite different, though somewhat the same in tone, I suppose. With Bad Boys, our buddy cops are Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, with Martin Lawrence being the family man who's more about the job, and Will Smith is our loose cannon. This was, like I said, I believe this was basically our film introduction to Michael Bay. And it's definitely easy to see how he went on to do the things that he did, with this being his starting point. Because this was before he went totally fucking insane. This movie is actually quite mild in comparison when you look at the sequel. Like, when you watch Bad Boys 2, this one seems really mild. And at that time in 1995, this movie was fucking crazy. And still is, of course, to an extent. It's just when you see Bay's stuff that's happened since, particularly this movie's own sequel, it seems really calmed down. Because you immediately we start with... Obviously, what this movie has that Lethal Weapon didn't is, when the movie starts, they already have the partnership, and they've known each other pretty much most of their lives.
Right.
We have Will Smith in his big expensive car doing his Will Smith thing, and Martin Lawrence trying to eat fast food without making a mess. And his whole, this isn't a car, this is a dick with two chairs in it. And that banter just starts immediately. Now, the things you might think about with this movie is, we were talking about implausible plots in big action movies. I think we all like Bad Boys to an extent. Some of us may even love it. Sure. Right. But there are a few things I want to talk about before we get into what we really love about Bad Boys. This plot, when all of the cops in the city are distracted, I guess this is The Dark Knight Rises, all of the cops in the city are distracted so they can break in and steal a shitload of heroin out of an evidence logger. And so and then this leads to a friend of Will Smith's getting killed, who is witnessed by her friend, who is Téa Leoni. And then this turns into, they come in to investigate the scene, and it's one of those moments where we have our stereotypical police captain, who is Joe Pantoliano, who I'm surprised didn't get typecast in this role. Because one of the first things there are two things I think of when I think of the stereotypical police captain: Last Action Hero and Joe Pantoliano in Bad Boys. Out of like 100 of those characters, those are the first two that come to mind. And then we introduce the character Sinclair, and the thing, this is one of those scenes where there's like 6 people introduced in this scene, because there's Mike and Marcus, and then there's Captain Howard, and then there's Sinclair, and then there's the other 2 cops that keep coming in and out of this movie. and everybody is saying each other's name in every single sentence, so the audience can get who's who. It's one of those scenes where you can just kind of see right through it, and you're like, well, this is definitely a movie I'm watching and not Cops Going to Work by any means. So anyway, after, obviously, Leone's character calls up, she's calling up Will Smith because she heard through his friend that got killed that he was the only person that she felt protected by. So she called him. But the only issue is she says, if I don't talk to Mike Lowrey, I'm going to walk. And Marcus is the only one there at the time. So Captain Howard says, Marcus, pretend to be Mike. And from here on, our plot goes. This situation could have so easily been avoided, but our entire plot depends on it. Him pretending to be Will Smith. And then they have to take that through the rest of the movie. Captain Howard's line of, you be him and you be you, but not in front of her. And it's so needlessly complicated. There is no reason to do this. It could be just hold on, I'll be right there, and then you wait till you find Mike, and then you take Mike to her, and then it can go without any ruse whatsoever. But they have to keep doing this. And then another thing that makes absolutely no sense is he starts living in Mike's house, but for some reason, by some reason I mean no reason, they go the full life swap and Mike starts living in his house with his wife and children. Now, I guess it's to protect them. I'm not sure from what, that he couldn't protect them from being there, but we just keep the ruse up for some reason because that's what Captain Howard wants. And that's what our whole movie goes on. And there's comedic plot points, and it sets up for a lot of misunderstandings, but it's all in good fun. It just makes no sense, and there's really no reason for that. And the thing that makes it most irritating is eventually we get to a point, it's after the Club Hell chase, after everything goes awry, and they blow up their only lead with Noah. Marcus's wife figures out what's going on. So she goes to his apartment, and Leone opens the door, and she says, I'm looking for Marcus Burnett. And she says, the tall one or the short one? So we went the whole movie doing this ruse, and sometime off screen, completely unceremoniously, they explain the ruse to her. And she just knows now. With no fanfare, off screen, she just knows now. And the movie just keeps going, like nothing happened. Like that whole thing for the entire first hour and a half was not happening. It's just one of those movies, and you have to deal with it. It's one of those movies where bad guys obviously don't do what they should be doing. Because, she kind of got around, the girl that got killed by Fouché was, Mike's friend. And of course she was a prostitute. So she was killed for being there. And then they went and they tracked down the madam that hired her and killed her. And Mike is there investigating. So they went through the whole trouble of coming here to tie up their loose ends. And what do they do with Mike, the guy they know as a cop? They throw him out of a window. Just right, there's no stories. Just out a window onto the porch. And they say, don't fuck with us. And leave him there. Oh, God. Once again, it's just one of those movies. So there are a lot of things here. And another thing is, this was like, Fresh Prince was still like right in its prime when this was going on. Like he was doing this and Fresh Prince like simultaneously. Because I remember that being like some in-jokes in some of the Fresh Prince episodes. Like they wouldn't let the youngest child watch Bad Boys. And he was complaining to Will about it.
That's funny.
And of course Will's response was, oh, they won't let you, what you gonna do? So the thing is okay. Obviously, this is a huge R-rated 1995 action movie. So you kind of get it. obviously movies like that, they're basically in their own area. Those mid-90s big action R-rated movies. Where they're basically movies made to be movies you couldn't take your kids to. So they threw in everything they possibly could all at once. They threw in as much violence as they could, over-the-top violence and explosions as they could, non-stop uses of fuck, and scantily clad women. So, in one way, you could see this movie as it's trying so hard to earn that R rating. Like a lot of the language feels so forced. When, especially coming from Martin Lawrence, where it's like, I mean, I know I'm one to talk, but it's like, wow, Martin Lawrence. It's not that it's excess, it's that it's weirdly placed. It's like, wow, Martin Lawrence, that was a weird place to put fuck in your sentence. It's like, you're trying to just put as many in there, though, as possible, so you can really, really earn that R rating. But the main reason I bring this up is, given the time period it came out, it kind of feels like, this movie was basically made to kind of contradict Will Smith's clean image.
Oh, yeah.
Because his rap was so clean and the show was so clean. That this was to kind of... This movie was basically intentionally made to make him look like a hardcore R-rated badass. Of course they succeeded. I'm just saying. It looks like that was kind of the motive, too. But that's the thing, though, is it totally works. He totally works in this part, despite the fact that this and Fresh Prince were happening at the same time. And Martin Lawrence really, really works in his role. And the great thing that Leone does, she does something really valuable in this movie that I don't think she gets enough credit for. And that is what this character could have been and what the character actually is as she plays her. Which is, this was clearly the damsel in distress role. And it was basically going to be, she's just going to be held captive, probably annoy them, and then fall in love with one of them. And yeah, that is what happens, but throughout the movie, she plays her in such a different way from the stereotype. Because she really, really stands her own ground. She ends up trying to kill Fouché by herself at Club Hell when they try to leave her behind. And she's very the anti-damsel in distress, because every time she's in distress, she's always trying to get herself out of it. Up to and include, her distress can also be what they're laying on her, always handcuffing her to steering wheels. Just in one way or another, she's always in distress, whether it's the heroes or the villains doing it, and she always finds herself out of it. And that was a really cool thing to do with that character, and it really went against everything we think we know from that character, even though she did do all the things. She's always in distress, she annoys them, and she basically ends up falling for Will Smith. But that's the thing, though, is when she falls for him, we kind of sense that she falls for him, but it's really just hinted at. Like, there's no real love story that happens. Because for a while there, obviously, she thinks Martin Lawrence is him, and she's hinting at it, but it's that kind of comical thing where he's married, so he's trying to stay away from it. When she's being very seductive on his bed, and Téa Leoni looks like Téa Leoni, and that would be a hard thing to turn away from, married or not. But then when she finally figures out which one is the other, it's still kind of hinted at the very end for them, but they never really go into it because they don't need to. So while it's definitely a very, very, cliche 90s action movie, it also tries to find those ways to kind of go against that too and not quite give you everything you're expecting. There's still stuff like I said, it's still very 90s. Club Hell looks like a set right out of The Crow. And there's the Martin Lawrence line towards the end when that henchman is there in the plane and he's shooting at them. And then he points the gun and says, "You forgot your boarding pass," and then blows up the plane. And in true Michael Bay fashion, that guy's flaming body comes in possibly flying out of the wreckage and into a shelf. And that the whole hangar blowing up thing was like Michael Bay's first big movie explosion. So it was like a big thing in the making. There's the stuff where they always set it up with that. Like Kevin Corrigan plays the chemist that's cutting the heroin. And so they have to have a big shipment of what he's cutting the heroin with show up at Club Hill in a vehicle. So what is he cutting the heroin with? Ether. And who happens to get in this truck? them right as they're getting into a high-speed chase. So, it's very easy to see that this was Michael Bay's first movie. So, yes, but like I said, though, despite all this and all of its grandness, when you look at the sequel went so far beyond. This actually seems mild and toned down in comparison. There's actually not as much action in this one as you would think, or as you probably remember. But it's still completely and totally entertaining. I would probably go with, I'm much more familiar with, I've seen Bad Boys like 50,000 times. But I'd probably say Lethal Weapon is kind of undeniably the better movie, because it really has a very kind of constructed way of going about things. And there's just everything in Lethal Weapon rings true. And in Bad Boys, you kind of have to... It's great. For this genre, it's great to just suspend your disbelief and say, fuck it. That crazy shit that would never happen in real life would totally happen in this movie. And I love watching it. And it's fun and fantastic. But if you want something that's definitely much more thought out and constructed and just all around kind of... Like I said, it's really just a better movie. You want Lethal Weapon, for sure. So, yeah.
That's what we've got for another edition of Versus. We have a lot of awards content on this channel, so check all that out. Check out the wrestling podcast as well, and Sip and Snack and the other regular segments here on Pop. So, next week, your cryptic comment is going to be Roxanne. Pretty much gave that away. And the end of January, we'll see what happens. We got something big for February. Not really big, but something we've been wanting to do for a while, so that should be fun.
I don't remember what that is off the top of my head, but I'll figure it out.
Well, it ties into a movie coming out in that time frame. We'll say that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I wouldn't call that big, but... Yeah.
Well, it's one that we've been wanting to do for a while. So that being said, I want to thank you guys and girls out there for watching. AJ, any parting words?